welcome to this month's edition of Poésie Joie. This is the place where I usually read poetry. I call it mini readings because it's usually just one poem. Sometimes it's my work if I'm promoting something. Usually it's somebody else's. We have a whole library of poetry from all around the world on this channel. Go back and see what you find. Usually I read the English translation because it's the language I'm most familiar with, and it is the lingua franca of the internet. If you find a poem on here that you enjoy it, but you are able to read it in its original language, by all means do so. Poetry in its original language and poetry in translation are often two different arts that complement each other. And so if you can read them, the original language with the translation side by side, you are doing yourself a favor. If you cannot, that is what poetry and translation is for. We are doing a no makeup version of this podcast or vidcast or whatever you want to call it today. I am disabled, and it being spring means that the atmosphere is extremely unstable. In the spring and the fall are the worst times of the year for me because the atmosphere is unstable, and that's when I experience my most pain. And usually spring is harder on me than fall. I don't know why. You'd have to ask a doctor. I'm sure they could explain it to me. But yeah, and today is a bad pain day, and I just didn't feel like putting on makeup. So bear with me on that one. Also, I apologize for the portrait mode. I know YouTube is going to put these bars on either side that I personally find annoying when I'm watching a YouTube video. And so I prefer to film in landscape mode, but I unfortunately cannot do that because I have dropped my phone one too many times, and also a result of my disability. I always have my phone on my person because I am one of those people who I fall a lot, and occasionally I'm at the point where sometimes I can't always get up, so I have to call for help. And as a result, though, my phone takes a lot of stuff that it's probably not built to take because it's always on my person when I fall, and I fall a lot. And as a result, the microphone no longer works in landscape mode. It only works in portrait mode. So if you want to hear you've probably noticed in some of the past episodes that the audio didn't work properly, and you had to rely on subtitles to even know what I was saying. That's why I realized that I had the audio issue, but I didn't know what the issue was exactly. I just knew that sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, and I hadn't figured it out. But now I figured it out that it has to be in portrait mode, so I apologize for the bars on either side. This episode of Poésie Joie is going to be a little bit different because it's not going to be poésie. It's not going to be poetry. We're going to read some fiction. Just a paragraph. It's all the rage right now, Wuthering Heights, because of Margot Robbie's new adaptation of the movie. And to be fair, it was probably overdue because there was a movie that they made in the 30s, I think it was 1939 perhaps, that I grew up with. And then there wasn't any new adaptations, as far as I know, of the movie until like 2011. And then there was one in 2011, one in 2015. There was a high school version of it made, I forget when, but it was sometime in the 2010s, that was like Wuthering Heights or something. That was, I don't know, Wuthering High or something like that. That was teenagers, and it was set in a high school. So it was kind of, you know how Clueless was the teenager version of Jane Austen's Emma? That's what that was. And now there's Margot Robbie's version of it. And I haven't watched Margot Robbie's version of it because it's still in theaters, and I'm not able to go see it in theaters. I'm pretty much shut in at this point in my life with my disability, and I haven't been able to go to see a movie in the cinemas since they released the one of the next to the last Star Wars movie of the original, trilogy, that those three trilogies, the next to the last of the last trilogy. I think was the last time I was in a movie theater. And so I have to wait till it comes out in some kind of streaming to watch it. But I've seen enough of other people's reviews to know that it's pretty much following the same sins of the other adaptations of the book, as far as, and even adding to it in some ways. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I have the book here. Also, this is called a mass-produced paperback, and they call it that because they all follow the same format. They didn't have to decide gutter size and page size and trim size, they call it, and the distance between the lines and all those tiny, tiny decisions of aesthetic, what it's going to look like aesthetically, you know, what the text, the font and all that is going to be. They don't have to make all those decisions because they've already been made, and they just switch out what book it is. They go, we want this to be Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, or we want it to be Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and it's usually one of the classics like Charles Dickens or something like that. They usually stick with the classics, F. Scott Fitzgerald or something, and it's usually a series. This was, it says on it, a Bantam Classics. So, and they all fit in your pocket. So it was really convenient because you could just slip them in your jacket pocket or your sweater pocket and carry it with you wherever you went and read it. And they were all, and because most of these tiny decisions of formatting were already made and they just switched out the actual book that it was, you could get them incredibly cheap, because that's the hard work that nobody wants to do when you make a book. Trust me, I've self-published, so I've done a lot of that hard work, and that's the work that burns you out and makes you never want to write another book again, because it's all that minutia, and it's hard. Even with all the modern tech, you know, and Word and all that, it's hard to do all that and proofread it and make sure there's no mistakes. You have to proofread it every step and every stage and every change you make. It's hard and it takes a long time. Well, anyway, since they didn't have to do that with these, every time they made a new classic, you know, they wanted to put out a classic book in this series because they were all the same size and everything. These could be incredibly cheap, under $10. This one, in fact, retailed for $3.95 in the U.S. I don't know if you can see that or not. It might be backwards. But as of 2026, the mass-produced paperback no longer exists. So from now on, if you want to buy a book of any kind, it's going to be $20, $25, $30 minimum, because every time they put out a book like this, you're going to have to do all that background work, all that formatting all over again. And you're going to have to pay for somebody to do that. So, R.I.P. mass-produced paperbacks. We're all going to miss you. And they're all going to be, every book is going to be a different size. No more handy-dandy in my pocket. In fact, this dress right here is pockets. No more handy-dandy in my pocket to carry with me everywhere. And that's really sad, because there's all these studies that say you can read an ebook for pleasure, and that's fine, but it just goes in and it's out. It doesn't stick there. If you want to read to learn, you have to read a physical book. It's how your brain works. If you want to read and retain, you have to read a physical book. And that's why they say, now I'm not saying this to poo-poo on any generation above or below any other. I'm just quoting studies here that they have done across the population. This is why they say that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are functionally literate. They can read. They cannot comprehend what they read, because they are used to, they go to school and they learn on a computer. They're used to reading ebooks. They do everything on an iPad. So when they do learn, they're learning off ebooks and stuff, and it goes in and it's out and it doesn't stay. It's not how your brain works. You need to learn. If you want to learn, you need to learn from a physical book. And so they read. They can read, but they can't comprehend what they can read. They can't get the meaning out of what's happening on the page, and they can't apply what they have read to their life. And like when it comes to important things like reading an important legal document or whatever, people are graduating college, reading at an 8th grade level is the highest people read at. That's the highest. We're not calculating for people who graduate and can actually read lower than that. That is the highest people read at. And so this, ending the mass-produced paperback, and actually books, physical books, now cost more, is a tragedy, because literacy is already in a crisis, because people can read, but they can't really. Technically they can read, but they can't really. It's called functional illiteracy. And if they can't get their hands on physical books, because now they cost $20, $30 for your cheapest book, literacy rates are going to drop through the floor. And I'm not just talking about functional literacy, I'm talking about actual literacy rates are going to drop through the floor. This is a tragedy. R.I.P. mass-produced paperbacks. These became a thing in the 1920s, and in 2026, they have discontinued them. But anyway, because of Margot Robbie's movie, the one good thing about that movie, all the criticism I've heard about it, even though I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, because I have to wait till it comes out on streaming. All the criticisms I've heard about it, the one good thing we can say for it is that it has caused everybody to pick this book back up again and read it for themselves. And I was one of them, because I've read it multiple times, but I haven't read it for years and years and years. And when I picked it back up, I discovered I actually misremembered it a little bit. Not completely, but I did add some toxicity to it in my memory that's not actually in here. I made it worse than it is. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what it actually is, because of course in the movies they always turn it into this great romance. Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw are the couple for the ages that all couples should aspire to. That's what they turn it into, this great romance. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not what it is at all. And that's actually an absolute abomination of the book whenever they do that. There is this whole affair between Heathcliff and Catherine Earnshaw, but I wouldn't call it love by any stretch of the imagination. The characters call it love, but it's not love. I don't know what it is, but it's toxic. It's not love. And there's actually a whole lot more characters in this book than that. It goes into the whole next generation, because the characters that are in the movies have children, but not with who you think that they would. And the plot line stretches into the next generation, and that's where things get really wild. Because what this actually is, Emily Bronte was exploring the ideas of intergenerational trauma before psychology was even a science. She was kind of a genius in that way. So when people take this genius movie that's exploring intergenerational trauma before psychology even existed as a science and minimize it down to a mere romance, that's what they're doing. They minimize it down to a mere romance. Think about that. What that's doing to this book. Not only what it does to this genius work from this colossal woman, but also what it does in people's minds to this book. Okay. I'm telling people that this book in modern times would have a big major trigger warning on it, for one thing. And I'm also telling people patriarchy minimizes this book into just a mere romance because it can't handle that Emily Bronte, little old, what they think of as nothing, Emily Bronte, who was homeschooled in the moors of Yorkshire, was genius enough to write about psychology before psychology existed. And let me tell you, there is not a single character in this book that is a good person. Not even the housekeeper that is the narrator. And she, you would have a tendency reading this book to think, okay, well, she's the neutral character because narrators usually are. But she does things that make you go, what? Every single person in this book is a toxic person. And she did that Emily wrote them that way for a reason. And as the book goes, and time goes on, it gets worse. Now, here's another thing we should point out, because in the movies, the way they're costumed, you always get the idea that it's Victorian London, right? They're always dressed in these, and it's not even Victorian, but it's Victorian-esque costumes. But that's not right either, because the book starts in the 1700s. You start out and you have no time reference, but you're reading and you're reading and you're reading, and then there's that scene where, and it's usually in the movies, where Catherine Earnshaw goes to this is hard for me to say with my disability, it's a lot of sounds, Thrushcross Grange. I have to really slow down and be deliberate. She goes to her neighbors and pretty much trespasses because she's not supposed to be there, right? She's a little girl, okay? They're children. When she gets married, she's still a teenager because, how women used to get married back then, right? And that's another thing, too, because I reckon Margot Robbie plays Catherine Earnshaw in her new movie, and Margot Robbie's what? I don't know how old she is, but please don't come for me, Margot, because you're gorgeous like a Barbie doll. Everybody knows it, or else you wouldn't have gotten that part in that movie. But, I think you're 30. But, at that time, all women got married at 15, 16, 17. Actually, no, they didn't. But because Jane Austen, when she wrote Pride and Prejudice, she makes a point to have Lady de Bourgh say to Elizabeth, your sister is but 15. Well, she's quite young to be full out in society. And so, okay, I'll correct that and say 17 was probably normal, 17, 18 normal for a girl to get married. But in this book, okay, the characters don't follow social norms by any stretch of the imagination. So I would say when Kathy gets married, she's probably around 15. Okay, because she has no adult figure to watch over her. Her parents both die when she's young, and she's left to run wild. Her brother's he's not a good person either, but he's not as bad. And then his dad dies, and he goes whoa, and becomes a raging alcoholic. I'm going to be saying all this stuff that YouTube doesn't allow you to say, so it's a good thing I never monetize this channel, because they would censor me up the wall and pull the video. But this is what's in the book. After their father dies, because their mother dies, she's in the book too, but she dies earlier. And after the father dies, Hindley Earnshaw becomes a raging alcoholic and just is whoop, you know, and nobody cares what Catherine does after that. So she has nobody to tell her what is proper for a young lady in society in her time frame to do, you know, and she's just so she I think she's probably really young when she gets married because nobody even cares whether she dresses properly or anything. Not even her little housekeeper here that's narrating the story who was around their same age, really. And okay, so and that was going somewhere, and I lost my whole thought. So anyway, she grows up wild. Okay, that was the point. So anyway, there's a certain point that's in all the movies where she and Heathcliff go to Thrushcross Grange. They're not even supposed to be there. They trespass, and Catherine gets bit by their half bulldog. Okay, because they're not supposed to be there, and the dog is doing its job. That happens in 1777, which puts us in an interesting part of history here because we're at the very, very, very end of the Great Vow Shift. And it's interesting because Emily illustrates that vow shift in this book because you've got some characters that speak. She writes in the English of her time. This was published in 1847. She writes in the English of 1847. Okay, so that's why it's readable to us today and stuff. I mean, we would consider this hard to read a little bit because language has become much simplified since the advent of the internet. Like I said, most people they read to an 8th grade level and not beyond. So I was reading this in 2nd and 3rd grade, but most people today would find this difficult to read. But it's the language of 1847. And so for the most part, it has remained readable for us today. Up until the advent of the internet. And with some application, you can still read it. But she illustrates a little bit of that great vow shift because you have some characters in the book who speak differently than others, who use a harder Yorkshire accent than others. And there are actually notes in the back of the book that help you to translate what those characters say versus the characters that speak in the 1847 English. So she does make an effort to illustrate that vowel shift a little bit because the characters that are older in the book speak differently than the characters that are younger because the book starts in the late 1700s, which is the very end of the Great Vowel Shift. So in that world, the characters that are older would speak differently than the characters that are younger. The language would be very different. And that would have also been the case with the way people dressed. The way people dressed would have also been in a great flux through that period. Kind of like, I guess the best way to illustrate it would be like how things made a huge shift throughout the 20th century. That's kind of what was going on between the 1400s and the 1700s, and then it sort of settled a little bit during the 1800s into something that we recognize today because we've been educated to recognize it. Well, okay, so, and Emily Bronte started this book in a time period where that shifting was still happening and really starting to settle. It was settling. By the end of the book, and we're in the next generation by then, we have entered Jane Austen's era. We're in the Regency period, the early 1800s, okay? And so you know what that looks like, more or less, because you've seen the Austen movies from the 90s. Those are closer to actual historical relevancy. You've seen Bridgerton, not historic. Bridgerton is like if Jane Austen, if the Regency period existed in an alternate timeline, in an alternate universe, because it's not historical at all, but it has enough of the flavor for you to recognize it. Bridgerton is more like Regency era sci-fi, but you get the idea, okay? So the costuming for this movie is always extremely off for what it should be, based on the actual time periods we're talking about and all of that. And so is the language, and the storyline, what they do to the plot is awful too, because usually the second generation is never included in the book at all, and the second generation is pretty much the point. And also, there's this whole thing where why do they always cast a white guy to play Heathcliff? Because his entire character motivations and everything he does springs from the fact that he is not a white guy, that he is, the book calls him a gypsy, and as dark as the devil is its wording, okay? And he deals with a lot of prejudice when he's a child, from every quarter, even from his foster father, Mr. Earnshaw, who adopted him. Even from him, even though Mr. Earnshaw left him and he was Mr. Earnshaw's favorite, even over his own children, he still expresses some prejudice over his color, okay? So he gets prejudice from every turn throughout his life, and that becomes the motivations for everything that he does, always, throughout the book. It colors his relationship with Catherine Earnshaw. It colors what he does with the children, and because really the book is all about revenge. His whole revenge arc, everything comes from the fact that he is not white like his foster brother and sister and their friends, their neighbors, the Lintons. It's all colored by that. So their insistence on always casting a white guy and then trying to make this white guy look like he's not white. I don't know what you're doing there. I don't, because it's like... Okay. But okay, so, anyway. Getting to the paragraph I wanted to read, though. Okay, so, because I'm going to end up telling you the whole story, and I didn't plan on doing that. Intergenerational trauma, okay? He has this whole relationship with Catherine Earnshaw, which is like, ew, because they're foster brother and sister, right? And if you want to read the book to see the whole revenge plot, is up to you. But then, okay, Catherine ends up marrying the neighbor boy, Edgar Linton. And Heathcliff marries the neighbor girl, Isabella Linton. And Henley marries somebody, we don't even know where she was from. And I can't remember her name. She is only in the book for a very short time. And I'm already past that part. And she's sickly throughout her time in the book. So, okay, and they all have children. Henley Earnshaw has Hareton Earnshaw, and his wife dies. And Hareton Earnshaw ends up being raised by Heathcliff, because Henley's a raging alcoholic, and he eventually dies. Does he die? Is he still alive right at this point in the book where I'm at now? Yes, he's still alive. He just doesn't care about the boy, I think. Anyway. I mean, he's just like so far gone that he's just given up on it. And so Heathcliff ends up raising Hindley, or ends up raising Hareton, who is Hareton Earnshaw, who is Hindley's boy. Kathy, the original Kathy, Catherine Earnshaw, and Kathy Earnshaw and Edgar Linton have Kathy Linton, who they call Miss Kathy throughout the book, although she's just Catherine too, really. But so you have Catherine Earnshaw marries Edgar Linton, and they have Kathy Linton, and then you have Heathcliff and Isabella Linton have Linton Heathcliff. Is his last name Heathcliff? I guess it would be. They have Linton. His first name is Linton. Yeah. It really helps to have a written chart. When I'm editing, I'll try to pop something up here that has it all lined up for you if I can. Anyway, so they end up having all those children. And I think Kathy Linton ends up marrying I've not got to this part of the book yet, so I'm trying to pull this out of my memory from years and years ago. Young Kathy Linton ends up marrying not Hareton, Heathcliff's boy. She marries Heathcliff's boy, but who ends up dying because he's sickly. Anyway, yeah, it's like the two neighbors just keep swapping and marrying each other. But anyway, there's this whole paragraph here where before Kathy Linton marries Heathcliff's boy, let me find it. Ellen Dean ends up at Wuthering Heights, and she's standing inside this room with Heathcliff, and he's looking out the window at all these kids while they're interacting with each other. He's looking out the window at Hareton and no, Hindley's already dead by then. Okay, it's hard to keep up with them. I tell you, I should have made notes for myself. Anyway, yeah, because it's multi-generational. It's like I should have made notes for myself. Anyway, Ellen Dean is the narrator. She's the housekeeper that's the narrator. And she's like everybody, all these kids' chaperones when they're going, because back then you didn't leave, if you were unmarried and young, you didn't leave the house unless you had a chaperone, and that always ends up falling to Ellen Dean. So she ends up at Wuthering Heights and with Kathy Linton, Miss Kathy, they call her, Kathy Linton, and she's outside talking to, she's with Hareton Earnshaw, and then Heathcliff's boy goes out there. What's Heathcliff's boy's name? Linton. He goes out there, and so the three are standing out there talking to each other, and Ellen Dean is standing in the house looking out the window. So is Heathcliff. Heathcliff is in the house looking out the window, and Heathcliff says this thing that tells us everything about Heathcliff's character and what he's thinking and planning about these children. And this will tell you everything you need to know about why this is not a romance. And that Heathcliff is a horrible, horrible human being. That he just goes around and ruins people's lives. Ruins them on purpose. And enjoys doing it. This is a bad guy. This is not some great romantic hero. This is a bad guy. Anyway, here we go. I think I found it. He says, this is Heathcliff talking. And he is talking about, I think he's talking about Hareton, which is Hindley Earnshaw's boy. "I've a pleasure in him," he continued, reflecting aloud. "He has satisfied my expectations. If he were a born fool, I should not enjoy it half so much. But he's no fool, and I can sympathize with all his feelings, having felt them myself. I know what he suffers now, for instance, exactly. It is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer, though, and he'll never be able to emerge from his bathos of coarseness and ignorance. I've got him faster than his scoundrel of a father secured me, and lower, for he takes a pride in his brutishness. I've taught him to scorn everything extra animal as silly and weak. Don't you think Hindley would be proud of his son if he could see him? Almost as proud as I am of mine. But there's this difference. One is gold put to the use of paving stones, and that would be Hareton Earnshaw, because they were the original owners of Wuthering Heights and had inherited wealth. So, okay. And, the qualities associated with nobility, although, but, One is gold put to the use of paving stones, and the other is tin, hyssop, linton. The other is tin, polished to ape a surface of silver. See, the thing is, Hareton is the gentleman by birth, but Heathcliff has raised him to be like a servant, and he talks like a poor person. Because in England, the classes, you can hear it in their accent. He has raised him to be a servant and to work like a servant and to be outside like a servant, and he doesn't know how to read. That's a big major point, and that's what he's talking about here, because he's standing outside talking to Catherine, and he points to the stone above the door of his own house that says Earnshaw and the date the house was built, and he can't even read that it's his own house that he has been deprived of, right? And she's like, "Tell me about this," because she can read it, right? So she's like, "Tell me about this," and he can't tell her about it because he can't even read what it says. And then she's like, "You can't read," and she starts laughing at him, which is not nice of her. And anyway, so this is what they're watching carry on when Heathcliff says this. And then Linton is the son of Heathcliff, right? So he's a no-name nobody because Heathcliff was a no-name nobody street boy. And so he's a no-name nobody, born of a no-name nobody. But he raised Linton to be a gentleman, and to think that he was the master of the house, and to be treated like the master of the house, and to be babied and coddled and waited on and carried on. So he's reversed the roles, right? That's what he's talking about. Don't you think Hindley would be proud of his son if he could see him? Almost as proud as I am of mine, but there's this difference. One is gold put to the use of paving stones, and the other is tin, polished to ape a surface of silver. Mine has nothing valuable about it, yet I shall have the merit of making it go as far as such poor stuff can go. His had first-rate qualities, and they are lost, rendered worse than unavailing. I have nothing to regret. He would have more than any, but I are aware of. And the best of it is, Hareton is damnably fond of me. You'll own that I've outmatched Hindley there. If the dead villain could rise from his grave to abuse me for his offspring's wrongs, I should have the fun of seeing that the said offspring fight him back again, and indignant that he should dare to rail at the one friend he has in the world. Heathcliff chuckled a fiendish laugh at the idea, and I made no reply, because I saw that he expected none. That's who Heathcliff is. That he enjoys the fact that Catherine is making fun of this boy. and he enjoys the fact that he has been the instrument of making these children into what they are, and ruining their lives, and stealing their inheritances, and flipping the world over on their heads. And he thinks it's great fun. And guess what? If Daddy was to step out of his grave and try to defend you, then you would come to my aid, because I'm the only friend in the world you have. Ha ha ha, Dad. That's the kind of man that Heathcliff is. That's the kind of terrible, terrible human being. I don't even know if you could call that human. And the world wants to tell you in these movies that this is a great romance, and that he's some romantic hero for men to emulate. That's not how Emily Bronte wrote it. Emily Bronte is telling you a story about trauma, childhood trauma, the kind of monsters it turns people into when they grow up, and the havoc they wreak on the next generation. There's even a redemption story at the end, when this next generation that he's wreaked havoc on join forces against him. And what people call it today, break the cycle. She was writing about psychology before psychology was a science. But you know how men are. They can't have women doing anything that's so glorious and wonderful and genius. Especially when it's like, wait a minute, we hadn't even thought of psychology yet. How dare you write about something like that when we hadn't even thought of it yet? So we'll just reduce it to a mere romance. And people believe movies before they turn around and read the book. Do you see what they're doing? I'm not saying this is an easy read, especially if you're one of those that read at an 8th grade level. You're going to have to spend some time with this. Now, there was a time I read this much more fluently than I do. Post-seizure episode, I'm stumbling all over it. Not because I don't know what it says, but because my mouth won't let me say it. But it's worth taking the time to fight with the English in here. If you're not at that level yet, it's worth it. It's also worth it even if you are, especially if you are at that level. Read the book. Because you see, it ain't nothing like the movie. The movie is just patriarchal propaganda. This is genius. This woman invented the science of psychology before it was a thing. Just saying. You need to read the book. You need to read the book. Always read the book. Always read the book. The books are always better. I'm not saying don't watch TV. I'm not saying don't watch movies. Although I went 30 years without hardly ever watching TV, and I'm perfectly fine. Although there are times people will be like, this commercial, ha ha ha, ain't that funny? And I'll be like, never saw it. But hearing you say it back is funny. But I just never saw it. Always read the book. You're so much better off if you read the book, because what people do to these things when they make the movies, it ain't it. It ain't it. I'm just saying it ain't it. Anyway, that was a very unorthodox poésie joie, because it wasn't even poetry, but seeing as how everybody's into Wuthering Heights right now because of the movie, and I would say that is the one good thing about making another adaptation that apparently followed the rule of the others, is that it did get people to pick this book up and actually talk about it again, which is always a good thing. But I'm definitely one of those that would always read the book because this woman wrote a masterpiece. And it is definitely not just a mere little romance. No. No, this is trigger warning all over it. Not a single person in this book is a good person. They're all disgusting, toxic people, but this is psychology. This is a study of psychology in fiction before psychology was a thing. And it was written by a woman, which is why they don't like it, which is why they're always trying to minimize it into something else, something pretty. Pick up the book. Thank you for joining me this month, and I hope you'll come back next month for a new one. And it will probably be poetry. And don't